welcome to your paint box, the second part of our December projects and we'll do this in probably just a few easy steps. And I'll see you at step one. All right, we're gonna start this pretty little green wreath here. And it's got some berries and maybe even some little Christmas twinkle lights lighting it up. So the first thing we're gonna do is take our brush and dip it in the water. I usually use this number 4 brush. That's the first brush you get in the first box. I just get a little water on it. These are water mixable oils. So we're going to just take this yellow ochre is the color we draw with, and I'm just gonna thin that out a little bit. And I'm going to go ahead and just mark a little halfway point on each edge. That kind of tells us where to go with our drawing. So for example, the wreath is fullest at the center, comes over towards the center again here, and we're going to make just a big circle. One of our easier drawings, right? Okay. There is our outside of our wreath, and then just a little space in the middle there. And then you can draw any kind of bow you want. I kind of did one with 3 big loops on each side and kind of wiggled down with some long ribbons. One of the ribbons kind of crossing over the end of the wreath kind of coming off the end. And I think really that's it for the drawing. So pause your video if you need to catch up to me a little bit, and I'll meet you back here for step 2. So we're going to start with step 2. We're going to start with the blue-gray barnwood siding that the wreath is hanging on there. So I'm going to make a kind of a light blue-gray. So let's take a little bit of your dark ultramarine blues, just a little bit. And then we're going to pick up just a tiny, even smaller bit of this dark umber brown. And I'm just using the end of my palette knife. Just try to keep it on the end where it bends a little bit. It's easier to use that way. I'm going to pick up a pretty good sized hunk of the white. And that blue and brown will mix into a really nice light gray. Wow, I think that's a pretty good combination right there. I'll hold my knife over here. Sure looks good. So I'm going to make, that's maybe the lighter shade. I'm going to make a darker shade of the gray to kind of streak through there, give some texture to that barnwood. So a little more blue this time, and a little more brown, not much, and a little less white. We'll make that darker color. And it looks like I didn't put in enough white because it's a little too dark. So a little more white. It's still too dark, so more white. There we go, I'm liking that a little better. Might be a little too blue. Let's see. Oh, I think that looks good. So we're going to start with those 2 colors. We're going to brush those on for the background. I'm going to just sort of, whoops, I didn't wash off my brush. Get that yellow ochre off of there with my water on a paper towel over here. Okay, so I'm going to sweep with the brush. Just kind of pull down in vertical strokes, sort of like you're mimicking the boards. Now see, I just added some more white because I feel like that blue is still too dark. So I just picked it up and added it with my brush. I'll skip over to this pretty light gray. Mix the 2 of them together maybe. And that needs more white. blue. So these small paintings, it's kind of easy to lay them down on a table. I cover the table up with some kind of plastic. This is just a sheet of plastic wallpaper that is peelable. I can just put it on some poster board and change it when I need to. Pick that up at Home Depot. Or even at the grocery store, you can pick up some plastic tablecloths. You just cover a table or a countertop and get started. So I'm still trying to keep all of this kind of pretty much these vertical brush strokes. Trying to get that paint to lay down nice and thick. So you see I have a shallow angle of my brush, really shallow to the canvas. And put a little more of that brown gray in there. Since I've made up all this paint, I want to lay it on there pretty thick. And then just to make it a little streakier, I'm going to just kind of drag some of that white through there to get that pretty barnwood, kind of washed, weathered gray. And then to get the kind of the seams in between the boards here, I'm going to clean off this gray off my brush. Get that cleaned off. And then I'm going to take, once my brush is nice and clean, I kind of squeeze it with a paper towel so that I can get it to be nice and sharp and crisp. And that gives me a real sharp little edge to draw those lines. I'm going to pick up a little of this burnt umber. I don't know if that's going to be too dark by itself. And I'm just going to kind of draw a couple of those little lines. That might be a little dark. I think what I'll do is mix burnt umber with the dark gray. And just kind of draw those lines down vertically. And I might even add a little bit of blue to those lines. They still look a little too brown to me. Adding a little blue, make them a kind of a softer gray color. Yeah, I like a little bit of that blue in there. That softens it up. Not quite so harsh. By the time I got to that last one, I didn't have any paint left on my brush. Okay, so we can soften some of those lines up. Sometimes what I do is just come back with my brush and kind of lightly come over those lines. See how it just really softens them up. Makes them look a little blurrier. I don't want to push too hard, you'll drag them right out of there. So a lot of oil painting is about how lightly you hold your brush, no pressure on it, almost like you're holding a little feather and you're about to drop it. Because just the pressure takes away that pretty texture if you put any pressure on your brush. So it's all about how softly you paint that. Let that paint slide under your brush very softly. There we go. Now the lines look kind of blurry. And that's good because we want all of our focus to be right here on this pretty wreath. And you'll see I even made the edges of that wreath a little blurry. We'll talk about that so that maybe the focal point is actually the bow. But that is it for step 2. So pause if you need to catch up, and I'll be ready to go with the wreath here back in a few minutes. Step 3 is the wreath. So what what we're going to do first is make 3 shades of green. I'm going to make a dark green, you see here, kind of the depth, and then a medium green, which is pretty much what the whole wreath is, this medium green. And then I'm going to make a light green for these pretty highlighted areas. And the greens that come in, if you have the Marie's set of paint, the greens aren't quite the green that we need. If you have the Reeves set, you could use sap green. But I think we'll go with the Marie's set here. So I'm going to make 3 shades of green. So blue and yellow make green, if you remember that. If you ever learned that in school. Blue and yellow make green. So I'm picking up the darkest blue. And I'm going to add just a little bit of yellow to get that dark green that I was talking about. So it's the ultramarine blue with just a little yellow. Well, I might put a little more yellow in there. It's looking pretty dark. That's better. All right, that's the dark evergreen color. Now I'm going to pick up the blue again. I'm going to put almost an equal amount of yellow in it this time. Again, I'm just trying to keep the paint on that bottom half of this palette knife. A little more yellow. I might just add a little more yellow. I want to make sure this looks different than the darkest green. One more time, just a little more. And then the highlight color, I'm going to start with the yellow because we're going in the reverse. It's almost a lot of yellow with just a little blue. And I think I want to add a little more yellow to that. And I have 3 nice shades of green ready to go to start this wreath. So I'm going to start with that medium shade. I'm going to pick that up on the end of my brush, a nicely loaded brush, and I sometimes just put my finger here to hold panels down. If you don't have a little tabletop easel at home, just lay them on your table and just hold it down from moving around. Oil paint's so heavy and thick that it tends to need to be pushed and pulled a little bit, so your canvas may tend to move around on you if you don't hold it down. I'm going to start putting in some of those darks. Just little accent areas. And I'm keeping my brush very shallow, not at a 90 or 45 degree angle, but like a 15 degree angle, keeping it close to the canvas. Keeping the whole angle of the brush down close to the canvas. And I like it to go on really thick. And these water mixable oils are very slippery, so I'm going to make some more paint in that medium color so I can lay it on pretty thick. And I'm just wiping off sometimes between colors. I want to get rid of that dark color I was using so I can pick up this medium again, start filling in, and I want to just let that paint lay pretty thick. I have both dogs in the studio with me today, and they are both sleeping right under my table. Usually we'll hear them snoring, but they're sleeping pretty quietly right now. So you see, as I'm putting this green down, I didn't mention, but I usually do in most of my videos, that I'm laying this green down without touching the gray barnwood. So if I don't touch that barnwood, see, I'm just leaving a gap. That will make it a lot easier later when we go to finish the painting. I'll show you what we're going to do about that gap. Okay, now I'm going to lay some of that pretty light green highlight color. And that really gives it some dimension. Just being careful not to touch that gray barnwood. I think beginners usually tell me that's the hardest part. And this brush is nice and sharp, so I'm just being very careful. And we'll come back at the very end and address that gap area. And so a little green up under that one side of the ribbon. Okay, now we're going to add the fun little berries in there. First thing I'm going to do is add these little clumps of red berries. And we don't need a small brush. If you've been subscribing and you have a small brush, you could use that, but it's going to turn out just about the same as if you use this medium-sized brush. So what you do is you're just going to take the corner of this brush, and just dab down those little berries. So a little bit of red paint right on the corner of that brush. And got to tap very gently into that green. Try not to pick up any of that green. That's all, again, about how lightly you're holding that brush. Keeping that red paint from mixing too much into that green paint below it. So it's kind of like icing a cake. Got to be very careful. And don't make too many, wouldn't make too many berries, because we're going to come back with these little colored lights that are in there, some little blue and yellow and purple lights. So that's looking pretty already. While I have that red paint on my brush, while we're working in red, let's go ahead and start laying the bow in. I'm going to pick up just a little bit of that pure bright red paint and make the outline of the bow. There's the middle, and we're going to add some lights and darks in those reds in a minute. See how I just hit the green, but see how carefully I'm trying not to. And oh, we forgot to put the middle of the barn to fill in the middle. I think I did that in the last exercise. Now, when I need to get a little skinnier down here, I'll turn my brush sideways and make it a little skinnier. So you get more of a drawing line if you're using the very end of the brush like that. So what we need to do is we need to make two other shades of red, a darker shade and a lighter shade. Now the dogs have woken up. Hold on. Okay. The dog's hopefully not barking now. I was getting ready to make two shades of red, the darker shade for the shadow area and the lighter shade for the highlight area. So let's take your bright red, just a little bit on the end of your knife. And then I'm going to reach over and get your dark red, pretty big hunk of it. And that'll make a nice shadow color. And wipe that off. Then I'm going to pick up the bright red, just a little of it. And I'm going to add some white, which I should have done in the last break. And that's our highlight color. Okay, so let's take the darker shadow color first and just kind of get it in there around the middle of the bow. And I think I put the highlight on the left side and the shadow on the right side. So you have to stay consistent with where the lights and the shadows are. So if the light's on the left side, on the bow, it should be on the left side of the wreath as well. So I might add a little more highlight here. So I guess the sunlight's coming from the left. A little more shadow. And I'm going to wipe off that dark color and start adding in the light. Oops, I'm sorry, I dipped right into the white. I didn't mean to do that. The light and bring that down the side, tap it in up here. And then I might go back. I'm leaving that gap space again up there, as you can see. I might go back and reach into this really just plain bright white and just put some really nice little highlights on that wreath. We're going to come back at the end and tie all this together. So we leave it kind of loose and the shape's kind of messy, and we fine tune all the shapes later on. But I'm going to go ahead, before I forget, while I'm remembering, to put in the barn color back in this little donut hole space in the middle here. Yeah. Using the edge of that brush so that I'm trying not to hit that red. Like I said, that's the part that trips up my new beginner students the most, is how to get those colors in without touching, because what happens is when they start touching, they blend together and they get what we call muddy. And you'll hear all my new students saying, it's getting muddy. So, you know, you see that I paint pretty fast. I'm using the end of that brush, so I'm getting the most width out of it as I can. And then I draw a little bit with the long end of the brush, the chiseled end. And so I can paint pretty fast when I'm using the wide side of the brush. But once I get in here to do some of this little drawing or touching up into these little shapes or trying to get close to the other color, that's when I use the chisel end of the brush. I think I mentioned I was going to add a little more highlights so that we really see the light coming from the left. So let's add a couple of those pretty yellow-green highlights. And I just went to our local garden store on the way here and picked up some greenery to put on my front porch. And we're pretty close to being finished. We're going to put those pretty little colorful lights in that I was telling you all about. I think we have some that are yellow, so I'm going to dip the corner of my brush just into the little yellow. And I guess I had the berries in clumps of 3, but I guess I don't need to do that with the lights. So let's just do kind of little. And then I'm going to do, let's do this pretty light blue. It's your cerulean blue, or it could be your phthalo, depending on what kit you have. Take my corner of my brush to mix instead of my palette knife. I'm just going to take a little bit of that blue and white, maybe a little more white. You can mix just the end of your brush. Same with your palette knife, just the end of it. Splash down a couple of these little light blues that look like little twinkle lights. And I think I had another color, a little bit of a purple. So I am going to pick up my palette knife now, and I'm going to take the dark ultramarine blue, and you see that I'm just taking a little tiny bit of it, and a little bit of the purpley red. They call it purpley red, purple red, or crimson because it is close to purple. Put a little white in there. My kids, when they were little, always liked all the colored lights on our trees and wreaths. Now mostly I do white. It's really pretty too. And just splash a couple of those little twinkly lights around. And I think that's it for this step. And we're going to come back and finish up in the final step. Okay, so this is going to be the last step, what I call finishing up. And we're going to kind of pull it all together. So I mentioned earlier that it's nice in a painting to have some things that are a little blurry, like the edge of this wreath, so that things like just the center area and the bow can be the focal point. So I'm going to go around now with just a little bit of green on my brush, and I really don't have much left here on my palette. Let's see if I can scrape this together or if I need to make more. I might, since that's kind of a medium, I might make a little more of that lighter color. Just, you can see I'm making a very tiny little bit. So I'm just going to put a little bit on the end of my brush. Put a little more yellow in there. I'm going to put a little bit on the end of my brush, and we're just going to work over that barnwood. So here goes, just a little bit on the end of my brush. And I'm just going to let that kind of slide across that barnwood. And just lift, I'm almost like lay my brush and lift it. And that's a really nice technique for getting that to look kind of soft and blurry. I'm just going to alternate between the darker color and the lighter. Alternate direction sometimes too. So I had all my strokes going in the same way a minute ago, and that didn't look very good. Change direction a little bit now and then. See, the stroke goes left and up and down, and that one goes left to right. So you see how I'm not picking up that gray because I'm tapping and then lifting my brush to get away from it instead of sliding through it. And I'm just gonna, you know what else we can do with oil paint? You can push. I'm gonna push that paint right up to that red bow. Be gentle on your brush when you're pushing the paint like that. And I'm just gonna lay that in. My sleeves are unrolling on me today. I'm gonna lay this in and I'm just using the corner of my brush, and I'm just gonna slide that paint just littlest bit. And I'm gonna get it right on the end of my brush and almost just steady my hand by putting my pinky down to hold my brush steady. Just kind of draw in there. Draw into those little shapes. Maybe put a little green in there in the middle. And then I need to soften the edge around the inside here. Just tapping so lightly. Trying to fill in. Most of the gaps are filled in. Just kind of push here and there. Drag a little bit of paint. So that's the only tedious part. You see how I kind of just flung the paint around earlier. And now we just take our time to be a little more careful. I feel like we might need some little white lights on this wreath too. Not too many. I don't want it to look like a polka dotted confetti wreath. Just a little twinkly wreath. All right, and then the last thing I'm going to look at is, do I have all my lights and darks in? Because it's so important to have your lights and darks. So I think we need maybe to pull together these darks in the wreath just a little bit more. And instead of using just the dark red, I'm going to add a little of that burnt umber brown. I'm mixing just on the end of my brush, the dark red and the dark brown, just a little bit. So keep good control of your brush is going to make painting so much easier. So keeping the paint just on the little bit at the end of that brush. And I'm holding my brush back a little bit instead of clamping in on it like it's a pencil or a marker. So just tapping a few of those darks in there. There, looks nice to have those dark shadows. brush just slipped out of my hand and I put a big red blob in my wreath. Cover that up. All right. Looks like my wreath's a little lopsided. Needs to be bigger over here. Make a little more of that green. I think I'm all out of that green. And there we go. I'm pretty happy with that. I think that's a really, really pretty holiday wreath. I'm going to clean off my brush and just use the very tiny corner of my brush to put some initials on there. Cover up that area. And what color should I put the initials in? I think I'm going to go with green if I have enough green here. And I'm just going to barely with the corner of that brush. Put my initials in it, and then maybe I'll give it to somebody as a little housewarming gift or holiday hostess gift. And I think that we're going to call this wreath finished. And I hope you enjoyed it. We'll see you for the next project. I hope you enjoyed the little wreath project. It shouldn't take very long. It wasn't very complicated, but it should be a fun project for you, and we'll look forward to seeing you for the January project.